Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another exclusive interview for 2017. I'm Patrick Covey for SantaTracking.net. We have Mr. Jamie Robertson here with us today, who kindly decided to join us and answer some of our questions about the days back at NORAD Track Santa. Welcome, Jamie.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little bit about where your military rank was back in the day while you were still there before you retired.
Yeah, absolutely. So, 1997, I actually got posted. I was in the Canadian Forces at the rank of major at that time. And I got posted down to Colorado Springs, NORAD headquarters, as Deputy Communications Director for NORAD, which is, as you know, is a binational U.S. and Canadian military command. Ostensibly, the mission there is to provide aerospace defense for North America. But one of the other jobs that is done by NORAD is, of course, the important job of tracking Santa Claus on Christmas Eve. That's a tradition that started back in 1955, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Yes, we've definitely looked into the history of NORAD. It's very, very amazing. It's so good to also see you had a part in that tradition. And what a lot of people don't know about you is how you actually brought this thing online. And real quick, I would like to say thank you for your service to both countries for celebrating everything you did with NORAD, not just with this program, but by actually giving your time and effort to other things over there at Public Affairs.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
So first of all, what was your role in this NORAD Track Santa program way back in the day, and how were you brought on, and how were you getting involved from the very beginning?
Well, back at that time, the Canadian, the deputy director, had the responsibility for running the NORAD Track Santa Claus program, in addition to all the sort of permanent jobs that we have to do. The U.S. Space Command at that time was co-located with NORAD, so I shared an office with my American colleagues, and we actually worked together for both NORAD, U.S. Space Command. But I was given the tradition, and being somebody who's been active on the internet since, I would say, 1993, the very early days of the internet, when you essentially had a lot of groups, that sort of chat groups that focused on niche areas, I guess, of interest to people. And I remember first discovering the internet, looking into historical information related to JFK and other interesting topics. And it occurred to me when I went to NORAD that this was a natural to take onto the internet, that clearly it's been done traditionally since 1955 with phone calls and with updates from NORAD. Traditionally, news organizations would call NORAD to see if we had any activity in the North Pole, etc. And there's a lot of quaint stories from the past surrounding that. In fact, NORAD used to produce the old vinyl albums with updates from NORAD, and using famous actor and actresses' voices. Even Ronald Reagan, in the days of his sort of Hollywood era, was one of those. Maureen O'Hara and a number of other folks. So I know there was a fairly rich tradition in North America for NORAD providing updates, and obviously exciting kids to hear that, yes, in fact, there is some activity in the pole, and there seems to be a gentleman with a sleigh and 9 reindeer heading to their part of the world. So it was a very quaint tradition. Obviously, it started by pure accident. So it's kind of a lovely story in its own right, but I thought that this was had vast potential for the internet. So I started work in 1997 to put together a website, bearing in mind that there was no budget assigned, no taxpayer money involved in doing this. It was a matter of working with organizations, people who were willing to basically donate their time, donate their services to make it all possible. And it was quite an intricate job, as you can imagine, with 24 hours of updates, translation to different languages. Initially, it was English, French, but we expanded from that. I think by the time I left, there was 7 languages. Tremendous amount of logistics involved, and getting the support of large organizations. One in particular, I'll mention, Analytical Graphics, do a lot of space imagery in support of NASA and others, and they had expressed a willingness to help put together the digital imagery, because obviously with the internet, seeing is believing for 8-year-olds, and we thought, if we're going to do this, let's do it properly.
Yeah, and it's definitely changed so much over the years. It's crazy to think way back in the day, this used to just literally be radio and phone calls, and that was it. And it's really cool to see how it's evolved to come online. Got involved with AOL way back in the day when you got started, and IBM trying to get everything online, and how it's just explosively blown up. At one point, there was a deal with Google back in the late 2000s, and then it ended up now in the hands of Microsoft. It's just getting so much bigger every single year, and we've actually talked with some of the people who've run the program in the past few years, and what they always tell us is basically the formula ever since you left has never changed. It's always been donations based, money and time of their employees coming in to answer phone calls. Really, the formula, as long as it's good, why change it? And it's proven successful every year.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and that was the thing that I think I felt that felt so heartening about the whole experience, was that everybody kind of got on board with the concept, because at the end of the day, we were all kids. We all kind of went through those magical Santa years, and I think that there's everybody agrees. I think that if you can give a child another year of belief in Santa, it's a magical time. And as kids, when we as we move on and get older, we all kind of buy into the concept of let's keep that magic alive for our siblings, for our friends, family, etc. So everybody jumped on with that spirit, even including the media. The world's media really made it grow. It's the sheer impact of all the media coverage all around the globe. I mean, everywhere, and it. Right from that very first year when we started, I mean, it was a real task to try and keep the site up and running, because you can imagine the servers required. That's why I went to the IBMs and the AOLs and others, because, again, there's no point creating a great product if you can't handle the pipeline of just massive numbers of people wanting to see, and also not just kids. It's also a lot of adults, because I spoke to some adults who, for them, they were in their family 3 generations of people who had grown up as kids listening to updates from NORAD going way back to the 50s, and that was a very special thing in its own right. So it was nice to be able to build upon the success of what had been done prior to me, and I did get to know Colonel Harry Sharp, the gentleman that got that first phone call in 1955, and he was excited to see the internet and the opportunities it gave to increase, I guess, that magic around the world to kids in different parts of the planet.
And sadly for us who are in the fan community, we didn't actually get to have the chance to meet Mr. Schaup before he sadly passed away a few years ago. But it's so cool to see how it's expanded just beyond North America. It's become this new thing. One of our members of our own team here, Liam, he's from the UK, him and his twin brother, and it's just gotten so much bigger. We always get messages from people in like New Zealand and Australia, that far out, that are just so dedicated to the NORAD Track Santa program, and they love what it is. They love how it brings families together, and that's part of what we started to do when we made our show that helped kind of complement the NORAD Track Santa program. We basically give a live commentary. We do predictions on where Santa's going to go next. We'll talk about maybe a little bit about the geography, where he's at. Explain that a little bit better to these kids, so not only are they having a good time with their friends and family, they're also learning about the world they live in today. And right now, as the way the world is right now, it's so crazy, and a lot of people don't know a lot about the rest of the world outside of their country, and it's good for them to learn about the cultures and everything else out there.
No, absolutely. Anytime you can knock down barriers that separate us as human beings, I think is a good thing. And I think Santa is probably one of those few things in the world that has this innocence that we all associate with our childhood. And plus, at the end of the day, I mean, Santa is a pretty positive individual, spirit, whatever you want to call him. And I think that I watched a lot of adults, like serious members of the military, media, people who have very serious jobs on a 24-hour basis. But when it came to Santa, when it came to Christmas Eve, I think everybody kind of became a kid again, and that was a great thing to see.
And that's the great thing about it. I mean, honestly, like for me, I'm 23 years old. A lot of people can't believe that, but it's just that one day a year that just puts a smile on everybody's face, makes you feel like a kid again, and brings everybody together and a little bit closer. That's the wonderful thing about this program. A lot of people don't know about this program, and it's crazy, especially when you introduce somebody to it who's never heard about it before, and you get their first take, or you get that experience to show them, hey, this is what this is. Do you have kids? Like, can you share this with your kids? And when they show it to their kids, they understand like how much bigger it is. It's not just tracking a little guy on a map. It's more than that.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing was when I started work on this project back in '97, my own daughter was 5. So it kind of, I got to see it through her eyes too. So that was, I think that even added to the experience. I mean, the amount of work to get it to pull this thing off was huge. I mean, basically every Christmas I had to work all the way through Christmas, but it was worth it because at the end of the day, if it brought some joy to children, no matter what part of the globe, then it was all worth it. And certainly we were fortunate. We got a ton of feedback from people. I remember thousands of emails. The initial phone call, which obviously is how the tradition started, that's still maintained. There's always people that will answer the phones at NORAD headquarters or Cheyenne Mountain. I understand there's like thousands of volunteers. When I did it, we had all sorts of people who would basically give up the Christmas Eve to do this, and so that tradition's always stayed. We built upon it to add the internet aspect, but not just the internet. We provided all of the world's media with Betacam, standard sort of professional tapes of all the various scenarios, so they can run the sequences that were relevant to them depending where they were in the world. Everything, of course, was calculated based on where he would be in real time, so there was never an issue with time zones, etc. It had to make sense, clearly. You had to, obviously Santa heads east to west, and we try to pick locations that made sense from the point of view of people being able to identify an iconic place in the world that, where it was, whether it's the Sydney Opera House or Eiffel Tower, etc. So there was a big element of geography that I think made it a little bit more fun for kids to follow his progress.
So since you've left the program in 2001, have you actually been able to keep up with everything that's been going on there since you've left, or have you had the chance growing up with your daughter, and like what's your take of it been like, of your legacy moving past it?
Yeah, I've always obviously that program remains special to me, and a Canadian major took over from me afterwards. He did that for 4 years also. The name will come to me in a sec. So for a long time, it was sort of the Canadian major down there had the lead, and I think there's been more resources sort of put into it now because it's grown so big. Like when I left, I mean, it was I think technically in the year 2000 we probably broke, I think, 5 world records at the time in terms of hits per second, per minute, per hour, per day. Like it was off the charts in terms of the level of interest. But again, if it wasn't for the companies, whether it was all the translations, I used to be a journalist before I joined the military, so I actually wrote out all the scenarios, all of the scripts, as it were, and the content for the internet. In fact, I took a look last night, and I recognize a lot of the words. So it's nice to see. I mean, again, if you get something right, then leave it. So they haven't, they've kept those elements. The basic concept's still the same. It's I mean, it's great how it's expanded. I mean, I would never second guess how anyone does it now, because it's 20 years later. I mean, I started in '97. I got to follow through with 4 years worth, and then did most of the work on 2001, because obviously you have to do a lot of work in advance before it comes to December. The December part's usually the easier part. It's just the logistics. We work with local radio stations to record all of the updates. So you can imagine, 7, 8, 9 languages times 24. So it really adds up in terms of, and it's important to we always made a point of making the language not a literal translation from language to language, but something that would make sense in that particular language. And why did we pick certain languages? Well, I researched to make sure we weren't imposing a North American concept on other parts of the world. So we tried to incorporate, UK obviously it's Father Christmas is more traditional to say than Santa, but it's the same man. And other parts of the planet, you've got different names for essentially the same person. Japan, there was no historical tradition, but there was a tradition in terms of the North American Santa. So we didn't just randomly pick languages. We tried to be culturally sensitive and pick languages that made sense to that particular tradition.
It seems to have worked out pretty well for you. I mean, it's evidence on just how many hits you guys have gotten over the years that this thing continues to keep building. So obviously the cultural expansion, as I would say, has definitely worked out. And it's good to see that it's sticking, that when you come on the website, I think nowadays through Microsoft, I think it's automatically translated to your language. So you might actually be able to get more languages than the original 7 that you guys would have started with way back in the day.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, obviously 20 years of change in terms of improvements of technology is given, well, organizations like your own the ability to comment in real time and to be able to add to the experience. And I think that's great because back in the early days of the internet, I mean, this was pretty much like I said, it was an experiment, but a good one. I mean, the first year, I suspected there would be a lot of interest, but that first year, it was like a huge amount of interest. And so then we just really had to expand our capabilities the following year. And each year, the traffic just went up exponentially. And the global interest, like the media interest, we had news crews from all over the planet that they sent to Colorado Springs, whether it was from Japan. Did tons of interview with the UK, BBC, and pretty much all the main networks. And there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff too. Obviously, they'll ask straight questions. We'll give them straight answers and give them all the technical reasons how we can do it. But everybody, played by the rules. There was no. I cannot remember one occasion where anybody kind of broached that you got to protect Santa Claus and the concept. Yeah. Nobody wanted to mess with that, and nobody did. I mean, I had a few people laughing just because. I mean, we really did work out some of the technologies and trying to explain how he can travel as fast as he does and so on. And we thought we came up with pretty good concepts. I do remember having a lot of fun on rooftops in the summer with Santas going down chimneys and getting photographs for our Santa Cam declassification, which was a lot of fun to show, how Santa hadn't changed over the years. But here's a photograph from 1958, and there's another one from 67, and so on. So we had a lot of good fun. There was an organization called Naturally Santa Incorporated, and these are Santas that meet in Colorado Springs, ostensibly because of the whole NORAD Santa history. And they offered to help us very early in the process, and they were very supportive. In fact, I got to meet with all these Santas several times, including in the summer, because they would meet twice a year. And I got to take my then 7-year-old to meet with them. So I was secretly asking her which one's the real Santa, but she had her ideas, and it was just great. It was everything about it was positive, and I got to tell you, the senior leadership in the Canadian military and the U.S. military, a lot of dedication to doing this. I had one of my bosses, the deputy commander-in-chief of NORAD, General George MacDonald, Lieutenant General George MacDonald. He actually drove like 100 miles out of his way. He was en route to spend some time with friends in Texas, and we'd got an email from a mother whose son had some serious health problems, and General MacDonald, he actually dropped off a whole bunch of NORAD souvenirs, including some chocolate coins, because I remember getting an email saying, hey, we got the chocolate coins. I'm thinking, what about the chocolate coins? I had no idea he was going to do this, but he did it. And things like that, where nobody's looking for, to be patted on the back. It's just that special Christmas Eve magic, I guess, and people went the extra yard to even if it benefited one kid, it was a great thing to see.
So, what would you say was probably your favorite memory of the NORAD Track Santa program, looking back at it now?
Wow, so many aspects about it. I think Christmas Eve, what we would have a team dedicated to handling all the media interviews. There would be probably about 6, 7, 8 of us rotating that would do the interviews. And the phone calls that went Cheyenne Mountain would handle all the volunteer calls where people would give updates on Santa's position. Occasionally, we would get a phone call that would come through that was actually from kids or from parents, and those were always pretty funny. I remember a couple in particular. One is probably about 11. Would have been about 11 o'clock, 11:30 New York time. It was a call from a father in Brooklyn, heavy-duty Brooklyn accent. It sounded like there must have been 8 kids in his house, and there's like pandemonium. And he basically said, "Look, I'm having problems getting my kids to go to bed." And said, "Can you tell us where Santa is?" So we put him on speakerphone, and we're saying, "Well, it's about 11:15 in New York, and we can see Santa's heading right for New York. He's going to be there in probably 45 minutes." And then he had this screaming, and then you can hear the guy, "See, I told you got to get your asses up the stairs." And you can hear all these kids running up the stairs, and we're just laughing our heads off. And there was lots of stuff like that. There was people wanting to, can we... People want to speak to Santa, of course, and we tell them, well, we're not Santa, but we can track Santa, and just kind of trying to explain, well, what are you guys doing? Well, we're helping Santa. So I had some colleagues banging some pots and what have you in the background saying, yeah, we're kind of Santa's helpers, and when you think about it, you've got all these grown men and women in uniform that are basically going back to being kids again, and those memories are very special. I mean, a lot of laughs, and a lot of we would get a lot of funny emails from people who are at work. It seemed like the adults got as much out of it because we wrote the scripts with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor as well that adults would get, and so we would get a lot of compliments on it. And I mean, I think we pretty much smiled the whole time we did this. It was impossible not to.
So what was the overall process of selecting the locations of the Santa cams where you guys were going to place them back in the day?
Right.
That sort of thing. And was that because of like maybe you were getting more hits in certain areas on the globe, or you were getting calls from certain areas, or is it more of like just trying to be generally more cultural towards certain groups of people and trying to hit the bigger cities? Or what was that like? Was the process of selecting that?
Yeah, that was we would try to pick locations where it would make sense. So obviously, I mean, there was some common sense in the process, but also when working with a company, the Analytical Graphics, they're based in Pennsylvania. I went to their location several times. I can't say enough positive things about those guys. They did, I mean, a lot. In the early days, I mean, it was probably the equivalent of $1 million worth of digital animation. I mean, this thing wasn't cheap. And again, AOL and IBM, I mean, if you try to calculate the cost in terms of the donated services, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars worth of support, and they all did it, and there was, like I say, there was never I had no budget, so there was no case of saying thanks for your services. Everybody donated their time. We would work with the company too to see what was in the realm of the possible, because they had to create the animation, but we would try to pick locations that had some kind of identifiable, I guess an easy way to identify where it was, whether it was a Sahara Desert or whether it was, I mean, it's a bit easier with London, Paris, places like that. But we didn't want to just pick big cities. We wanted smaller locations too, and try to take into account that obviously Santa's is visiting every location. It's just a matter of picking places that kind of was inclusive to kids in that particular time zone. So it's a combination of things, and it's I mean, there's a lot of work to do, and timings. I mean, it was about a 30-second segment, and some of the imagery, especially back then, was amazing. I mean, it was quite clever, and each year, of course, it got better and better as technology improved. But Yeah, I mean, we tried to, recreate this. And not only that, we had units, not just at NORAD, but we had fighter units, but and whether it's Canada or the US
Mm-hmm.
assigned to provide the NORAD role, where you would actually have pilots that would participate. And so it wasn't just, us in NORAD headquarters. It went way beyond that. I remember working with the North American Aeronautic Administration, NASA. I remember the former astronaut Sally Ride, Space.com, they got involved. I mean, there was a number of organizations, the White House,
Mm-hmm.
Canadian Prime Minister, different. I mean, everybody kind of jumped on to it, and they were asked in Washington, of course, what NORAD was doing, and everybody. There was no cynicism. That's the beautiful thing about it. I mean, it's an easy thing to be cynical about, but why would you want to do that? Like, that's one of the few iconic traditions that I think truly is a positive thing. At the end of the day, it's hard to be negative towards Santa.
Definitely, you can't possibly be negative towards Santa or the whole tradition of everything. And I remember looking back at my childhood, one of the coolest videos you guys ever did, you brought it up with the fighter pilots earlier, was when Santa was always arriving into Newfoundland. There was always that video of him coming into North America back in the day.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
animation, we look at it now, it's really outdated, but looking back at those clips, it just brings back so much nostalgia. And it was really cool because those guys that they mentioned were from like Bagotville, Quebec, flying those
hmm
CF-18 Hornets. And it was really cool because a few years ago, the Canadian F-18 demo team has done several air shows all over North America. I actually got to meet those guys in person, so it was really cool to connect two and two together for the first time ever to see, hey,
yeah.
like these are the same team of guys that you got to see digitally many, many years ago.
That's right. And everybody, whatever unit. I mean, obviously we have in Canada, we've got a base in the far north of Canada, like as far as you can go, called Alert. I
Yep.
mean, they'll get into it. We've got our various NORAD units. I mean, it's an old tradition in the sense that it's a 20th century tradition, but now it's 1955 predates my birth, and it's like I say, three generations, maybe touching on four now, where they associate NORAD and Santa, and the interesting thing is when we're talking about what we do and how we track Santa, we're actually talking about the real mission of NORAD, and all the technology we're talking about is all real technology. It's obviously we're sort of talking about Santa and the infrared heat signature
Mm-hmm.
with Rudolph's nose. I mean, all these things at face value are possible, and we did do all sorts of calculations on how fast would he have to travel and so on. And it's nice to see a lot of stuff on the website kind of keeps with that tradition, and Santa goes beyond just the physical world as we know it. So there's obviously some magic that you can't just explain away by science alone.
And it was really crazy, like, looking back at some of the stuff in recent years, that mission of NORAD's kind of gotten a little bit more confused or changed up lately. People are starting to get a little bit worried that maybe NORAD's trying to take this to be too militaristic towards this Christmas tradition, and it's kind of unfair, honestly, lately, because all of us who've been involved for several years have known that, no, that's not the case. This is more than that. This is just something that NORAD wants to promote, that they do all this stuff on the side to say, we are helping protect you 24/7, 365. We just want you to know you are safe, you're comfortable. We just love to do the Santa thing on the side, and it's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. In fact, when we had the Y2K concerns back, I'm not sure if you guys would even remember that, but
I was
it
very
was
young.
it was basically when the whole issue of the ticking over into the new century, and then code-ins, and how will it affect missile systems, all this kind of stuff. And actually, I can say NORAD was kind of almost like a poster child for being prepared for Y2K. But because of NORAD Track Center, we got so many calls that same year because they understood what we did because of the NORAD Track Center. It's kind of funny. But we had, I mean, so many of the world's media with us right through Y2K, and of course nothing happened because we'd actually had tested all the systems way in advance. But of course, when you're monitoring missile launches, because who would you go to other than NORAD? And I'm pleased to say that the light stayed on, everything was fine. But there is a legitimate aspect to NORAD. But when I was there, I certainly we tried to make a point of not militarizing it, but it wasn't. NORAD didn't sit around and think, how can we come up with a tradition? And in fact, it predates NORAD by 2 years, 1955, the Continental Air Defense. You had Canadians and Americans there at the time doing what NORAD does now anyhow. But the point is, it happened by accident. So the media came to NORAD when they found out about the phone calls and the incorrect phone number, which an enterprising journalist tracked down the initial ad, the Sears Roebuck ad.
Yep.
And there was a certain purity to the story. So, we do have the equipment to monitor activities in the north, so let's see what's going on Christmas Eve. I mean, yes, there's always going to be. It's easy to criticize, but the same token, it is a tradition whether you like it or not. I think that both sides of the border we try to avoid, militarizing anything. This is about Santa. It's not about the Canadian or U.S. military. It's just that we're there to provide a service on that particular night, in addition to the stuff we do the rest of the year.
It's a really cool tradition. Just to expand upon that, just to say, yes, we do this stuff, but it's very one-sided. We're just showing that we have the capabilities to do more than just track Santa. We can do all this other fun stuff too. And
right.
It's been cool to learn about that over the years, how things have expanded and grown, how now a lot of naval stuff's been involved even more and more now. So it's nice to see the naval aspect tied into all of that. They're even doing stuff now as far as like geological stuff, like with surveying equipment and stuff like that. They can see if there's underground nuclear explosions and stuff over in crazy spots like North Korea. And it's nice to see how everybody's tied together. And then when it comes to Christmas Eve, it's even better. It brings even more people together. So to show that there's history there, to show that there's other stuff coming up in the future that we haven't even seen yet, that's going to be really cool. I really can't wait to see where this program goes. It always continues to amaze me every single year. I know it does for a lot of our group as well. So it's been really good to see that something you guys brought on the web is slowly growing, but also really, really cool.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it's always a pleasure for me to check in every now and then to see where things are at, because 20 years is a long time and it's flown by in many respects. But it's nice to see people, and not just NORAD, but organizations like your own that kind of jump on board and engage with it, because it's a big thing. Santa is a hugely important cultural icon now in all sorts of places in this world, and I'd like to think that he stands for something positive, and we can never get enough of that in this day and age.
That's true. There's got to be a lot of positivity out there to keep everybody together and try to prevent as many conflicts as we possibly can. So we've been talking about all the successes and positivity of you bringing on the web and the amount of amazing stuff that you guys have done. But what were some of the obstacles of trying to get this thing online? Like, who did you have to reach out to figure out how everything was going to go? Or who did you have to reach out to get this on the web and to get the support you needed to make it happen? Because obviously this didn't just happen overnight.
No, I mean, I had complete support from the chain of command, that, as the term we'd use in the military, basically the leadership of NORAD, but both on the U.S. and Canadian side, to just to figure it out what needs to be done, how it can be done. So I really sort of operated independently to make those determinations, figure out what organizations are available to help, who's willing to do it. So it was good old-fashioned, pick up the telephone, make some calls, see if it was very clear from the early days that there were very few organizations that could actually handle the kind of bandwidth needed to be able to put this together. I mentioned the one company that produced space imagery. They do this on a regular basis in support of NASA and the European Space Agency and so on, and the Canadian Space Agency. So they made it possible, because you can create a website, but of course, what does kids want to see? They want to see Santa. Now, it's digitized information in the sense that this is how. In the early days, this is how our equipment's interpreting what they're seeing. So it's not, you're not it's not like you're there with a camera necessarily. So we explained all that, and we wanted to make everything had to pass the 8-year-old test, right? And so you had to make sure that there was a logic to it. It couldn't just be, fanciful stuff that made no sense. And plus, being sensitive to what we already know about Santa or Father Christmas, Père Noël, etc. Everything sort of had to blend together. But a lot of it was making phone calls to companies, going to see IBM. I mean, I did that and explained what we're trying to do. And let's face it, there's a good corporate aspect, a good corporate social responsibility aspect to being associated with a wonderful program like this. So a lot of companies were quite willing to step forward. IBM did it for at least 2 years, AOL a couple of years, certainly when I was there. But also local companies in Colorado Springs that did the translations, which was a tremendous amount of work. One of the local radio stations that gave us the time to go into a studio and record these things. And I'm telling you, it took a long time. We're talking, up to 200 different scenarios. And I'm probably forgetting different organizations, but it was just a matter of lining up all the various tools. It wasn't that complicated in many respects. I had a good product to sell, which is Santa, so that helped immensely. And I think people realize straight away, look, what is it we're trying to achieve? We're not trying to market NORAD or whether or not we did this. People are going to phone NORAD to ask where Santa is. So my thought was, if we're going to do it, let's do it properly. Let's take it on the internet. This is where the future of the program. I honestly thought that at the time. This is just an obvious solution. It's got to be the internet. Yes, back then, certainly for you guys now, looking at the technology now compared to then, it was very basic technology, but at the time, this is leading edge stuff. This was pretty high tech, and I think it was the right time to do it. I think the internet was starting to take off in the mid '90s, starting to get serious, and people and also just the imagery. Let's face it, television news needs imagery. It can't just be a phone call. I mean, yes, you can do that, but it's a lot better to have something to show. And I knew that would explode, and sure enough, it did. We sent those tapes, provided tapes to all sorts of news organizations. And whereas in the past you get local news channels calling, we had all the networks doing interviews with us on a regular basis all around the world, and we'll pick up the story. It was probably one of the biggest stories. I mean, I can't think of a bigger story than it's Christmas Eve, Santa's coming. I mean, basically that was what kids wanted to know. That's what parents wanted to know. And the feedback, there was some very touching feedback that we got after each year, and that meant a lot to me. I remember there was one I'm living in Ottawa right now, the capital in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I remember we got an email from, I think it was a couple of lawyers, and said they have a really precocious 9-year-old, 9 or 10, and the kids at school have been telling him there's no such thing as Santa. So they sat him down to look at the NORAD Track Santa site. So he sat there for about an hour going through everything, all the technical explanations, and then they said, all of a sudden, he pumped his fist in the air and said, "Yes, there really is a Santa." And and they were just basically thanking us. So like, you can't put a price on that extra year of belief in that magic, and that meant a lot because that's what it was all about, really. And the good thing is you see those same kids with being part of the program themselves, wanting their younger siblings to see it, and playing. Psychologists all say Santa's a good thing. It's good to have this belief. It's good to have this sort of magic, and we all remember that as kids. I mean, what did we get most excited about in the course of the year? It was probably birthdays, but then Christmas. And I think Christmas, because it was a collective experience, it's magical, and we all, I think, wish we could recreate that sort of innocence. And that's what I think the program helped contribute to, and everybody played their part, whether it's TV networks or the IBMs, the AOLs. I mean, it was done. All the work was done for the right reason. It was really about the kids. It was nothing more than that. But a lot of work went into it to make it happen.
We've actually talked with Stacy Knott. She was one of the recent people who was heading the program, I think from like 2012 through 2015. And what she said is they were starting back as early as like April every year, just calling up these companies, emailing them, like seeing what we can do. How can we get these volunteers? And it seems every single year, without fail, everyone still shows up. Everybody takes phone calls. Everybody's helping become a bigger part of the process, and that's what's great about it. I think they've even expanded more and more since you left. They've added, I think, like an additional like 200 volunteers annually to help out. It's gotten way bigger.
It's definitely a snowball effect, and it's immense. There's no question about it. And the thing is, it's going to be bigger whether you want it to be or not. It's just there to stay, and I think there's an expectation, certainly in North America, but I saw a lot of it in Europe. I mean, the number of countries that we got calls from and emails from, it was incredible. I mean, just about everywhere on the planet, just in my time, and I know that it's expanded greatly since, and I definitely commend my colleagues down in Colorado Springs and elsewhere that are doing all this work, because I think it's definitely worth it. And and they want to do it properly, they do it to the best of their ability, and the companies that give up their time and well, I guess money ultimately, and that's much appreciated.
It really is great. Now, with today's social media, it's so easy to reach like that wider audience or to get the stuff out there. It's what we use to get our show out there. We promote the show annually. We'll put up a trailer for our stuff in like the middle of summer, nowhere even close to Christmas. And we'll get a lot of fun response back from that. Now, without having something like that today, do you think that maybe this program wouldn't have grown nearly as much as it has now? Do you think it would still be kind of like plateaued or declining? Like, how do you feel this would have done?
Without social media? I think social media has probably added sort of some turbo jets to the whole thing. I think that television alone would have, just the internet, the use of the internet and the sheer number of people that on the internet, I think it would have grown year after year anyhow. Plus the TV, I mean, TV news still has tremendous amount of importance around the world, and it's a natural for them. I mean, if you're going to talk about Christmas and updating, I mean, where's Santa? I think it would have continued to grow. I think social media has just expanded the experience to make it more interactive, which is exactly what you guys are doing. I think that's terrific. It's taken it to the next level. I mean, thinking back 20 years, it was still the sort of nascent stages for the internet, still very basic. I mean, it's pretty good, but limited in terms of it was a lot of big sites. The social media was very limited back then, if at all. I mean, it predates pretty much everything. I think AOL back then, AOL was the Facebook of today, I guess. And that started to change things a little bit, and and that was why I went to AOL, because AOL was a natural, like you have a community, and at that time AOL was the big player. And I mean, I've been to their server farms, and they're immense. And that I did not want to have a website that crashed continually. That would just be counterproductive. It had to be something that could sustain, and that's why right off the bat I had to go to the big companies. There were lots of companies that would be willing to help, but they wouldn't have had the capacity to handle the traffic, which is incredible. Plus those digital animations. I mean, it took up a lot of bandwidth back then. I imagine it's a bit easier now because of the formats.
Yeah.
But it was a huge website, and I mean, the traffic speaks for itself.
I mean, compression's gotten even so much, a lot easier for video. You can take something that's a massive like file and shrink it down so small and still get the same service out of that same file.
Yeah, there was a. I'm just trying to remember. I'm gonna have to look back at the formats back then, but there were certain companies that produced formats. I think Real.com.
I think there was a lot of Real Player. I know.
Yeah, Real Player. That company may have some of it in their potentially in their archives, because a lot of the format we used that format. I think because that was one of the challenges: is which formats do you pick? There wasn't necessarily universal formats back then. You didn't really have the PDF or whatever the format. So you had to. That was another thing I had to pay a lot of attention to make sure it was accessible. We didn't want to create something that was so high-end that only a fraction of the computers could actually, view the material. So we wanted to try and make it as universal as possible during a time where we weren't really at that stage on the internet. So there's a lot of creativity in trying to figure out, okay, what would be the best solution to give it the widest experience possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we try to do.
I remember like when it was expanding into like Windows Media Player a few years later, and then I think Microsoft at one point might have had a player, but that went defunct as well. It was kind of cool to see like how there was more accessibility, moving forward, and how you didn't have to worry about it as much later on down the line as like, hey, can all these computers play it? Because now everyone's computer could potentially play it. All you had to do was just download the player, and then you had access.
Right, yeah. Those were certainly a bit more challenging, perhaps back then, just because of the format issues and capacities of people's computers. We didn't want to, like I say, overload the system so you couldn't actually see anything unless you had the most up-to-date computer.
I remember back in the day, our first family computer was like a 1998 like Gateway. It was just like something that was there. It was accessible, very basic, but it got the job done, whatever you needed done. I'll never forget the old days when I was a kid. Like, as much as we hate it thinking about it now, like dial-up and blue screen of death, like, that was pretty memorable, fun stuff thinking about, like, back on it. Like, wow, look how far we've come. Like, back when we might be tracking Santa in, like, 2000, it's changed a whole lot since then.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's improved the experience for people because, back in 97, 98, I mean, it was technology was still a bit of a challenge to make it universally accessible, but we tried our best, and certainly the feedback was positive, but I think it's maybe a bit easier now with more formats that people can access.
Now, I'm going to go a little bit more personal here. I know I've had a lot more direct questions with you about the program. We actually had the chance to interview one of your former coworkers, Andrew Corrales, last year. Very friendly guy. He lives in Virginia now. He's retired like you. He's the one who ultimately got us in contact with you through a couple different channels and said, yeah, I'm sure Jamie would be more than happy to chat with you guys. And it's crazy to see how even after all these years, he still has fond memories just like you do. One of my favorite stories he told us was that how you guys used to sit down every single day and have a cup of coffee together.
Yeah, well, we had our office wasn't a large office. We were all co-located. There was probably like 9 of us in there, and we were representing NORAD and US Space Command, and I was the only Canadian in the office. We had 3 civilians maybe, and then a number of US military would have been. Andy was one of them. I had a US Master Sergeant, Larry Lincoln, that worked for me, and a US Major, Mike Birmingham. There's another US Major Perry Newis.
We heard good stories about him too.
Yeah, no, Perry, and he's Mr. Radio. His voice was terrific.
Oh yeah.
But a funny story about Andy. Yeah, Andy's a great guy. We used to have a lot of laughs in the office. I mean, we were dealing with serious stuff, but we always had a lot of fun. And that was I have nothing but fond memories of my 4 years there. But I subsequently got posted to the Canadian Embassy in Washington in 2003. Spent 3 years there. So I went to the Pentagon, and who's the first guy I run into in the Pentagon, of all places? Andy. And it's like, what's the chances, There's Andy walking down, and I'm first day in the Pentagon. It was just really surreal, but it almost seemed like, that makes sense. It would be someone I know. But yeah, Andy's a great guy. He had young kids at the time as well, so I'm sure he probably told you. And Andy has a great voice too, a great radio voice. And but yeah, we had the camaraderie was terrific, and there was no us and them. It was all, we were kind of colleagues, and it didn't really matter who was who. So we worked hand in glove, and that's the way it was within NORAD, but also Cheyenne Mountain, which had. I love Cheyenne Mountain. It's a great place to go in. You don't feel like you're inside a mountain when you're in there. You feel like you're in a ship, actually, which is not surprising. The steel structure is built by the Navy, and the Army Corps of Engineers sort of blasted out the rock. But you got all these different centers in there: Missile Command Centers, Space Operations Center, the Air Operations Center. So a lot of Canadians, Americans. In fact, most people wear the green sort of flight suit, so you have to specifically look sometimes to see whether or not somebody's American or Canadian. So it didn't really matter, and that's pretty much a unique military command. There's nowhere else quite like that, and that's been around for such a long time. So, and all those folks, like I say, all those folks and their families all gave up Christmas Eves to work on this, and it was a a very positive thing. But yeah, when I look back at Andy and the rest of the guys and girls, there was Tech Sergeant Kathy Gander. I remember we had some very special moments, a lot of laugh, but also some tears, because you'd hear some really tough stories, kids who had terminal illnesses and so on. So this was very emotional on occasion too, and we realized the impact that this whole thing had on people, real people's lives. It wasn't for us just about media stuff. It was really about individual kids and individual families, and that meant a lot. So, and how often in life do you get to do that? Have that kind of impact.
Exactly, and that was part of the thing that we tried to pass on with our program when we started it back in 2009 was, let's provide something that's not just your run-of-the-mill commentary. Let's try to brighten people's day. We'll run the show all day, literally, basically just as long as what NORAD's doing for their map, maybe just shy of it a little bit, but we try to get full world coverage, try to get everybody involved that we possibly can. Back when I first started this, I had my family actually involved. We were taking Skype calls from some of our viewers, which was really fun. We'd have this one dog from Seattle and his two parents. He'd call in, and we would have the parents doing like the dog's voice, like he was talking to us. That was pretty funny. We used to take like song requests. We have like little 7 and 8 year old kids calling in saying, we want to hear Jingle Bells on the show. We'd be like, all right, coming up next to Jimmy, Jingle Bells. And that
nice.
was a really heartwarming experience for us to do something for the kids and give back, because thinking back on it, we were in that place once. We were there listening to the radios or going on the web watching NORAD Track Santa, and part of what we decided we wanted to do is not just to archive this stuff so it's just there on YouTube just for clicks and for views. We want to give back to the community. We want to provide something that's a fun experience every Christmas Eve, and literally such a good job putting this together and trying to promote it in social media, say this is a family-friendly event. Yes, some of us are older in age, like teenagers and 20-somethings now, but we keep it PG, it's family-friendly, and it's fun. Liam could tell you, when he was first started, him and his twin brother, they were kids. They were just excited about our show when they first found out about it. And then I ultimately decided, hey, these kids are so cool, but they're super duper smart. Let's bring them on and get them involved. Now Liam is our top animator. He's our Team Yansu version of what the guys at AGI used to do back in the day.
Yeah,
and he animates Santa cams for us. And it's cool because we liked what you guys did so much. Now we do voiceovers annually in the style of NORAD Trek Santa cams, but we make our own cams.
No, I think that's terrific. And that's if I was still doing the program, that's probably one of the things I would do, is to try to outsource some of this stuff, because, companies, they're the only ones at the time when I did it that had the capacity to do this. It would have been very difficult for Liam back in '97 to do this. He could have done it, but now you can, and I think it's kind of nice to have. I think that's where social media is so important. That there's a desire out there to want to be part of this, and why not? Sort of harness that incredible energy and creativity that's out there. It's and I think now with the tools that are available, there's a better chance of being able to do it and do it better than those companies did back in the day. So I'm really optimistic, and I can't praise you guys enough. I think it's fantastic.
I would like to personally thank Mr. Jamie Robertson for coming on to today's interview.